scribes and the Pharisees sitting in Moses' seat. So the key was that the scribe and the Pharisees, so those were the teaching and leaders at that time. Verse 3, all therefore whatsoever he bid you, observe. Key word, he said he, not the Pharisee. He is the Moses, what he bid you do. Read verse 3 again. All therefore whatsoever he bid you, observe. That diligently observe and do. But do not you after what? Their reforms and tradition, which was the Pharisees. The Pharisees, they were putting their tradition and form on top of the commandments. So they were pressing the people, the truth. Verse 4. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on man's shoulder, but they themselves would not move them with one of their fingers. Jump to verse 13. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against them. For you neither go in yourself, neither allow them that are entering to go in. So that's why he's saying they need to level up. Except your righteousness to see that a Pharisee, you can't enter the kingdom, because once again they were teaching false.
Okay, and so now to pity pat off of that, because you gave us the scripture in Romans chapter 8. Now, get 1 Peter 3. Just read that first. He's going to get 1 Peter 3. And read 15.
And account that the long suffering of our Lord is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given unto, hath written unto him, as also in his epistles, speaking in them of all of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable rest.
Twist,
okay. As they do also of other scriptures unto their own destruction.
Okay, so we know right now that Peter even said, who is the apostle, said that Paul's letters are hard to be understood. And many people that are unlearned, you know, and it may not be on purpose, but they twist them to their own destruction. All right, so he said that the reason why the law had to be leveled back up is because of the religious leaders. Now notice that the Messiah himself said that all that he has said, that you do, observe and do. So like he said, that he is Moses. So if this is the Messiah in the New Testament, he's telling them to observe what Moses taught, which were the 5 books. That's coming out the Messiah's mouth.
So the question, there's a contradiction somewhere. If Paul is saying we don't have to do it, but Messiah is saying do it, something wrong. So either we misinterpretation or one that's in error.
Exactly. So now we're going to touch on Romans 8 and 3. And remember, he said in Matthew, he said it was a tradition that the Pharisees put on the people. And it was heavy burdens upon them, right? Okay, so Romans chapter 8. And what we do is, again, we're allowing the scripture to give us the understanding of what's being said. Because obviously Paul has to be in line with the apostles. Because remember, the Messiah chose the 12. And in the prayer that the Messiah said in John 17, he said that those that believe on me through their word, which means all the apostles had to speak the same thing that the Messiah spoke to them, that the Most High gave to the Messiah. So anyone that learned from the apostles had to say the same thing. So Paul, being the latter apostle, he had to comply just like they did. Because we know in Galatians, Paul went back to Jerusalem and spoke to who? Peter and James, to make sure that the course that he was doing was on point. So he had to check with the original apostles that learned from the Messiah first. All right? So now let's get the understanding of Romans 8 and 3, where he says, for what the law could not do. Now we have to ask ourselves, what is Paul talking about when he says, for what the law could not do? And then he says, in that it was weak through the flesh. How was the law weak through the flesh? All right. Now, what was that Matthew 23 about tradition? Read that again. And then we're going to show you what Paul was talking about in reference to how the law actually was made according to Scripture, not according to how I'm saying it. Read verse 4.
For they bind.
I'm sorry, no, but read verse 3. He's gonna stay in Romans, but he's gonna read Matthew 23 again, just so we can get the point of why I'm going to Romans. We'll read verse 3.
Okay, Matthew 23, verse 3. All therefore whatsoever he bids you observe, that diligently observe and do, but do not you after the reforms and tradition, for they say and do not.
Okay, so the key thing is reforms and traditions. All right, and who's he speaking about? The scribes and the Pharisees. So when he says here, for what the law could not do, and that it was weak through the flesh. Well, what's the flesh he's talking about? Let's go to Mark chapter 7. So Mark chapter 7. All right. Now we see, if we read from verse 1, we're going to deal with a tradition. All right. So watch this. Mark 7 verse 1. It says, then came together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes. Who was the Messiah talking about in Matthew 23? The scribes and Pharisees, which came from Jerusalem. Verse 2. And when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault. Verse 3. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands often, eat not, holding the what? Traditions of the elders. Verse 4. And when they come from the market, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be, which they receive to hold, as the washing of cups and pots, brazen vessels, and of tables. All right, so now let's jump down to I'll read the whole thing, verse 5. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, who's the him, the Messiah, why walk not the disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? Now we already know that there's nowhere in the law of Moses that talks about eating bread with unwashed hands. There's nowhere in the law of Moses. But remember, we're dealing with Romans 8:3, how the law is made weak according to the flesh. All right? So then verse 6 says this. He answered, who's the he, the Messiah, said unto them, well have Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Verse 7 is the point. Howbeit, in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of what? Men. Verse 8. For laying aside the commandment of the Most High, you hold the tradition of men, as washing of pots and cups, and many other things such as you do. Verse 9. And he said to them, full well ye reject the commandment of the Most High, that you may keep your tradition. So how is he making a commandment of no effect, or making a law of God no effect? It's through their traditions, not philosophies, not as far as we can't keep the law. So that's the context of Romans 8. So how did the Messiah now condemn sin in the flesh? So let's go back to Romans 8. Romans 8 and 3. We're going back to that. All right. So he says, for what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, the Most High sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. So why is he in the likeness of sinful flesh? Because he's just like them. He's just like them. The same likeness of the Pharisees and Sadducees. He's the likeness of sinful flesh because he's man, right? So then he says, and for sin, condemn sin in the flesh. Well, when did the Messiah condemn sin in the flesh? Let's go to John chapter 3. All right, so John chapter 3. So John chapter 3, and let's get down to verse 17. Let's get down to 17. We're going to read from 17 through 19. So now it says this. For the Most High sent not his Son into the world to do what? To condemn the world, but that the world through him might what? Be saved. Now how is the world going to be saved? And he says this. He says, he that believeth on him is not condemned. Well, what were they supposed to believe? They were supposed to believe the words that was coming out of his mouth when he walked the earth. They were supposed to believe that he was sent from the Most High and that he spoke the words of the Most High. All right? Then he says, verse 18 again, he that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of the Most High. Now here's 19. And this is the condemnation. So now the Messiah now is condemning the sin. So he says, and this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness. Well, how do we define light in Scripture?
Let's go to Isaiah 8:20.
Go ahead and read that.
Isaiah 8:20 read, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there's no light in them. So that's the reason why he had left it up, because they walked in darkness. They didn't have the Torah or the law, speaking the law. They put aside the law for the tradition and commandments that they taught people.
Okay, and the Bible defines light as being the law. Now, we look into a dictionary and find out what light means, or how the dictionary defines light. It's not going to say law. So we have to allow the Bible to define what the light is according to the Scriptures. So light, according to the Scriptures, is the law. So then he says in verse 19 again, and this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their what? Their deeds were evil. Verse 20, for everyone that doeth evil hates the light, neither comes to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved or be what? Corrected.
The light is the Torah with the law.
Exactly. The light gives you the instructions, the light gives you the teaching. So if you have the instructions, and if you're doing wrong, it's what's the instructions is what's going to expose your evil deeds. And that's how he condemned the sin in the flesh. So verse 21 says, but he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in the Most High. So if anyone's going to accept their evil deeds by coming to the light, now guess what? Now you're going to be able to see the fault in you, and then he's going to say his deeds will be manifest, that they're wrought in the Most High. So go back to Romans 8 and look at verse 4. So Romans 8 verse 4 says that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us. That's why Paul is saying that now he condemned sin in the flesh, which were the religious leaders by their traditions, so that the righteousness of the law will be manifested in us. So that because the Messiah is the one that taught them. He taught them the correct way. He leveled up the law so that they can go out and now be the light of the world, like he told the apostles in Matthew 5:17. And he said that you are the light of the world and you are the salt of the earth. Well, what's the characteristics of salt? Salt does not take on the flavor of anything else, but what you put salt on, that thing takes the flavor of the salt. So the apostles were supposed to be the influencers of Israel and not be the influence. So by learning from the Messiah, they were going to affect whoever they were sent out to in reference to hearing from the Messiah. So the context of Romans 3, as far as what the law could not do, is talking about the law was not effective because the men that held the law at that time, they were making it of no effect through their traditions. That's why it wasn't effective. That's why it wasn't popular. But the Messiah came to level it up. That's why when you read all of Matthew, he said, you have heard that it was said by them of old time. He's giving them what they were teaching, but he said, what I say to you. He's correcting everything. And he was going according to the law, like you pointed, adultery and all that. But you have to read the full context to basically get the gist of everything he was saying. So that's just one point I want to touch on in reference to that. And also, I'll hit verse 5. He says, for they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. So what does that mean? They that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. If we can figure that out in John chapter 3. Let's go to John chapter 3. And let's look at verse 30. Let's see, 30, verse 30. All right, verse 30 says this: He must increase, John is speaking, that I must decrease. He that cometh from above all, he that is of the earth is earthly. Okay, so what does that earth mean? How did man come from? Man came from the dust, right? So the earth can talk about flesh. All right, so he says, he that cometh from above is above all. Well, who came from above? The Messiah. And he says, he that is of the earth is earthly, and what? Speaks of the earth. So when you go back to Romans 8, and he's talking about the flesh is what you're speaking. What you're speaking of is what you're talking about. So when you hit Romans 8 and 5, read that one. And yeah, no, I'm not. So remember, in John he says, he that is of the earth speaks of the earth. That's what he says. He that cometh from above. No, he's gonna be.
Okay. 85, right?
Yeah.
For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh,
Right.
but they that are after the spirit, the things of the spirit.
All right, so that's the same thing. In John 31, he that comes from above is above all. He that is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He that cometh from heaven is above all. That's spirit. That's your flesh. That's your spirit. Now jump down to verse 8.
8. Okay. In the same text,
In
right?
Romans, yeah.
In Romans. So then that they are in the flesh cannot please God.
So you can't please the Most High if you're in the flesh. So by your teachings or anything, you can't please Him. Okay? So and keep going.
But ye that are not in the flesh, but in the spirit, if he be that be in the spirit of God, dwell in you. Now, if any man that is not in the spirit of Christ, he is not of his.
Did you read the before the carnal mind?
That was before. Because the carnal mind, that's 7. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, but it is not the subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be.
Okay, so that means that you can't keep the law in the flesh. That goes all the way back to what you talked about in Jeremiah 31:31. So if you're in the flesh, then you cannot please the Most High, and you are not subject to the law. What law is he talking about? It's the law of Moses. But in order for you to be subject to it, you must be in what? In the spirit. So anyone that is saying what is not done today or what is done away with, that's because they're in their carnal mind. Because he already gives us the understanding of how you're supposed to keep the law and how you can only keep it. All right? So that defines what Paul is talking about in reference to traditions and in reference to what the law could not do as far as being effective.
Let's go to John 17. I heard you read the verse earlier. I want to kind of expound more on it. I think it was a key point that we kind of glanced over about past. Okay, these words spoke Yahushua and lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour is come, glorify your Son, that your Son also may be glorified you, as you have given him power over all flesh, that he should give eternal life to as many as he had given him. And this is life eternal, that they might know you the only true Most High, and Yahushua HaMashiach, who you have sent. I have glorified you on the earth. I have finished the work which you gave me to do. And now, O Father, glorify me with your own self, with the glory which I had with you before the world was. I have manifested your name unto who? The men, the disciples. So we can't use this to say it's talking about us. It's not talking about us. So if you want to be consistent, we can't say that one